Hello and welcome back to Dear Jordan. This last week was long. A snowstorm dumped about 30 inches of snow directly onto my car, paired with single-digit temperatures. Add to that a wrist I shattered last year that still reminds me daily it exists, plus the chronic pain I manage on a regular basis, and by Friday, I was done. Capital D. I decided that me and the kids would go out to eat. When we showed up at the restaurant, we were told it was going to be a 35-minute wait. I agreed. I was tired. Fine. About 25 minutes after we arrived, another family, also a party of 5, walked in. They were told their wait would be 45 minutes. They agreed too. The difference was that although we both agreed to our wait times, they proceeded to analyze, question, and critique every moving part of the restaurant as if they were conducting an operational audit. I stayed quiet. Then a table opened. And guess who got seated first? Not us. I asked if there was another table since we'd been there longer. I was told, that was actually supposed to be your table. What followed was a small huddle between staff, a refusal to acknowledge the mistake, and the continued taking of the other family's order as if nothing had gone wrong. I asked for a manager, and when the manager came, I was met with a simple, hollow, sorry. That's when I lost it. Now let me be clear, losing it for me doesn't involve yelling, throwing hands, or attacking anyone. I did raise my voice above the one you are hearing today, but losing it for me means I become very insistent on a solution. It means I start educating the people refusing to fix the problem and exactly how and why they're wrong. The situation was resolved, and afterward I sat there thinking not about the restaurant, but about my children, about how my children saw me in that moment, about what I modeled, about whether I was the kind of mother I want to be, not just how I provide, but how I respond. That's what led me to today's letter. So, grab yourself a cup of coffee and listen in. Dear Jordan, I used to think there was a template for being a good mother. Not written down anywhere, of course, but felt. An unspoken standard that once you become a mom, you trade in your personality for responsibility. You stop being playful, you stop being curious, you stop being you. And in exchange, you're issued exhaustion, seriousness, and a face that lets the world know you're doing motherhood correctly. I tried that version for a while. Turns out pretending to be someone else while raising a human is deeply unsustainable. Before motherhood, I was always someone who engaged with kids like they were actual people. I talked to them. I listened. I played. I wrestled on the floor, got pulled into pillow fights, played basketball, went shopping, had long conversations that mattered to them, not just to the adults in the room. And somewhere along the way, I absorbed the idea that once I became a mother, that part of me was supposed to disappear, as if nurturing required erasure. But motherhood isn't a template, it's a relationship. And relationships don't thrive on scripts, they thrive on presence. Psychology tells us that secure attachment isn't built through perfection or sacrifice alone. It's built through attunement, being emotionally available, responsive, and real. A child doesn't bond with performance, they bond with a person. Scripture echoes this quietly. Love your neighbor as yourself. Not instead of yourself, not at the expense of yourself, but simply as yourself. You don't stop being a person because someone depends on you. A child isn't a baby doll. You don't get to put them back when you're tired, but they also aren't a role you're supposed to play. They're someone you're meant to know. And the lie I had to unlearn was that being a good mother required becoming smaller, quieter, or more distant from who I actually am. In reality, the best thing I could bring into motherhood wasn't perfection or sacrifice. It was me, fully present, learning how to build a relationship with another life while still remaining myself. Because motherhood isn't about disappearing into responsibility. It's about showing up consistently, imperfectly, honestly, as a person who loves another person enough to grow alongside them. I didn't grow up seeing motherhood modeled as a relationship. I grew up seeing it modeled as endurance. My mother was responsible. She worked. She kept the house running. She did what needed to be done. And by every external standard, she was a good mother. But what I learned without anyone ever saying it out loud was that motherhood meant carrying everything quietly until you were completely spent. Emotion wasn't something that moved freely in our house. It was managed, contained, postponed. Not because it wasn't important, but because there was never enough energy left for it. By the time I was 7, my mom was back in the workforce, and when adolescence arrived, messy, awkward, loud, I arrived with questions and met exhaustion. I wanted to talk when she needed to rest. I needed guidance when the day had already taken everything from her. So connection became conditional. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but practically. Psychology calls this emotional unavailability, and it doesn't require neglect or malice, only chronic fatigue. A child learns quickly what's quote-unquote too much to bring to a parent. So I learned to self-edit, to wait, to minimize. When I asked questions about my body changing, about life, about things I didn't have the language for yet, the answer was often, "I'll get you a book," which is a very efficient way of saying, "I don't have the capacity for this right now." The book never came. So I grew up with responsibility modeled beautifully and relationship modeled quietly absent. Scripture says, train up a child in the way they should go. But training isn't just instruction. It's presence. It's walking with someone while they're figuring things out, not handing them information and hoping it lands. I don't fault my mother for surviving the way she did, but I had to recognize how that model shaped me. I learned that love looked like sacrifice without engagement, that care looked like provision without conversation, and that's the template I carried into motherhood, until I realized something was missing. Because children don't just need to be raised, they need to be known. And that's when I understood that motherhood couldn't just be about doing the work. It had to be about building the relationship, even when I was tired, even when it was inconvenient, even when it meant staying myself instead of becoming stoic. But knowing all of that was easier said than done. At the point of life when I became a mother, I wasn't living, I was surviving. My primary concern wasn't emotional availability. It was staying alive long enough to be physically present. I focused on endurance, on getting through the day, on keeping everything from falling apart. And for a while, that felt manageable. I started motherhood with 2 boys, and strangely, I didn't feel the same pressure to be the example. I was good with boys. I wasn't one, so the weight of modeling womanhood didn't feel immediate. I told myself that part could be handled by the men in their lives. I could focus on providing, protecting, and pushing forward. Then I became pregnant with you, Jordan, and suddenly everything shifted. For the first time, I felt the weight of example pressing directly on my chest. I wasn't just raising a child, I was shaping a woman. Or at least, that's how I felt. And the question that wouldn't leave me alone was this: how could I teach you to become a woman I admired if I wasn't living as one myself? That question unraveled everything. I began asking things I had never allowed myself to ask before. How did I end up here? How did I accept things in my life that I would never want you to experience? How did survival quietly replace intention? It was the first time in my entire journey as a mother that I stopped and questioned everything. And once I finished questioning, I knew one thing for certain: something had to change. I just had no idea where to begin. I had backed myself into a corner that felt sealed shut, and I wasn't sure there was a way out. Then you got sick. You were 8 months old when I came home from work and found you burning up. I turned you over and saw welts across your back. I didn't hesitate. I picked you up and drove you straight to urgent care. The doctor looked you over and dismissed it as an allergic reaction to Tylenol. He suggested Motrin instead. So I tried it, and you didn't get better. Your leg began to swell. Then it blistered. Something was clearly wrong. I took you to your pediatrician. They drew blood, checked your vitals, ran tests, and still couldn't pinpoint the cause. Then another pediatrician walked into the room, took one look at you, and said the words I will never forget: "She needs to go to the ER immediately." You were transferred to the Children's Hospital in Westchester. There you were admitted. Blood was drawn every few hours, which meant no sleep, for you or for me. Machines beeped, nurses rotated in and out, tests kept coming back inconclusive, and yet the thing that stood out most wasn't the fear. It was you. You weren't fussy, you weren't inconsolable, you weren't breaking down under the weight of what your body was going through. Somehow, you still smiled. day after day, quietly strong in ways I didn't yet have words for. Eventually, after multiple medications and endless waiting, one finally worked. You got better. And I was relieved, yes, but I was also changed. Because in watching you endure pain with strength and grace, something clicked inside me. Scripture says, out of the mouth of babes. And in that hospital room, without saying a word, you showed me something I had forgotten. Strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing to move forward even when you don't yet know how. And if you could fight through that, then maybe I could finally find the strength to make the changes I had been too afraid to face. So I began making moves to get myself out of the dangerous situation I had been living in. Slow moves, careful ones, the kind you make when survival has taught you to measure risk instead of dreaming freely. It didn't happen all at once. Life, as it tends to do, added complications, another pregnancy, a pandemic, and a series of detours that aren't even worth unpacking here. But none of that changed the mission. I needed out, not just to be safe, but to become me again, fully, without pressure, without fear, without the constant weight of other people's expectations and the unspoken rules about who I was supposed to be, without being controlled by the same force that had shaped my choices for years. Because somewhere along the way I realized something important. I couldn't raise you into freedom while living in quiet captivity. Motherhood wasn't asking me to disappear. It was asking me to come back to myself. Psychology tells us that children don't learn strength from watching perfection. They learn it from watching honesty, from watching someone choose growth, even when it's uncomfortable. Scripture echoes this in a quieter way. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, not by pretending, not by enduring endlessly, but by changing on purpose. And that's what this letter is really about. Being a mother is not a template you follow or a role you perform. It's a relationship you build with another human being while remaining a whole person yourself. You don't stop being curious. You don't stop being playful. You don't stop being thoughtful or strong or flawed or growing. You don't hand yourself over to motherhood and hope it gives you something back. You bring yourself into it. So, Jordan, if there's one thing I want you to carry with you, it's this. Never believe that love requires you to erase yourself. Not in motherhood, not in relationships, not in life. The strongest thing I ever did as your mother wasn't sacrificing who I was. It was choosing to become her again, so I could show up for you as a real person, building a real relationship one day at a time. So, Jordan, if there's one thing I want you to understand about motherhood, it's this. It isn't about becoming someone else. It's about staying yourself while learning how to love another person well. You don't need to disappear to be a good mother. You don't need to harden yourself, exhaust yourself, or perform sacrifice for anyone's approval. A child doesn't need a template. They need a relationship. They need presence. They need honesty. They need someone who is willing to grow alongside them instead of shrinking for them. If you ever choose motherhood, I hope you remember that you are allowed to remain curious, playful, thoughtful, and whole. And if you choose a different path, the same truth applies. Love should never require you to erase who you are. This is what I had to learn the hard way. And this is why I write to you. Because the greatest gift I can give you isn't a perfect example. It's the permission to be fully yourself while building a life rooted in love. With all the love I am still learning how to give, your mom. If you're listening to this as a parent, maybe this episode stirred something uncomfortable. Maybe it affirms something you've already felt but didn't have the language for. And if you're listening as someone who grew up without emotional space, I hope it gave you permission to name what was missing without assigning blame where survival was doing the best it could. This letter wasn't written from a place of mastery. It was written from experience, from trial, error, and a lot of unlearning. And like most things in motherhood and in life, it's still a work in progress. If you found yourself reflected in any part of this, you're not alone and you're not behind. Growth doesn't come from having it all figured out. It comes from being willing to look honestly at where you are and choosing to move forward anyway. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space for these letters. If you'd like to stay with me, you can follow Dear Jordan on Spotify or wherever you listen. And if this episode resonated, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon. This has been Dear Jordan, Letters to My Daughter.